Facebook co-founder Chris Hughes was at the epicenter of the start of one of the biggest tech companies in the world. Since stepping away from Facebook, he has become increasingly aware of wealth inequality in the United States. We caught up with Hughes for a future episode of Bloomberg Studio 1.0 and began our conversation about his new book on income inequality called Fair Shot, in stores this week. Take a listen.
The reason that led me to it is because I do think that my story is indicative of an unfairness at work in the American economy today, that 3 years worth of work can lead to $500 million in financial reward should give people pause. Particularly in a moment when median wages haven't budged in 40 years, and we haven't created full-time jobs in a decade. We create these part-time, contingent, flexible jobs. So we talk a lot about robots in the future. Work has come apart, and income inequality is only getting worse. And so I think it's important to be honest about the unfairness at work in order to usher us into a conversation about how guaranteed income could restore the American dream.
So, just being devil's advocate, why should we listen to a one-percenter about what the solution should be?
I'm not here as a spokesperson for anybody but myself. I'm here to channel a lot of the conversations that I've had over the past couple years and a lot of the people that I grew up with who tell me that the American dream is on life support, that when you can't find $400 in the case of an emergency, which is what half of Americans say, you can't find the gas money to go interview for a job or for childcare, for healthcare, all of these kinds of things. So we know from the stats that our economy is fundamentally unfair, and I think a lot of us on the left and the right are casting about, well, what can we actually do about it to change it? And that's where I think the guaranteed income comes in as a powerful tool to address it.
As you came into wealth, how did that shape your ideas around inequality? Did you have your own sort of personal transition?
Yeah, well, I think particularly in my case, where we started Facebook, and Facebook over the course of nearly a decade grew and grew and grew, and I saw my own financial holdings grow and grow and grow for the first years as I was working there. But for several years after, I wasn't at the company. I was working on different projects, I was working for President Obama, I was doing a lot of different things, and yet the wealth just kept growing. And so it gave me pause and made me say, well, what is the source of this wealth? Is it the actions that we're taking, or is it also major economic forces that are happening behind the scenes? And so in a very personal way, after Facebook's IPO, my husband and I decided to give away the vast majority of this money because it feels like it's the only way to address the unfairness that's work that's created in the first place.
Tell me about the discussion.
When you are fortunate and you come into this kind of wealth, you think about, where did this come from? Why did I get it? And what do I owe other people? And particularly growing up where I did with my family, my husband did with his family, there's a sense that you should always be thinking about what we owe one another.
Silicon Valley has created so many powerful tools and an incredible amount of wealth. And some would say it has also come with a sense of entitlement for some of the richest people. Do you think Silicon Valley is too arrogant these days?
I do think that there is a sense, particularly amongst people who have made a lot of money a lot of the time, and I'm not speaking just about Silicon Valley, but just in general, that it's all because of one's own actions. And I think we tend to underestimate the power of these macroeconomic forces behind. So things like automation, globalization, the rise of finance. I'll give you an example. In Facebook's case, over the course of the 10 years before it went public, it raised over $500 million in venture capital. That kind of financing wasn't possible 30 or 40 years ago, and it's specifically because of financial changes that we made in the 1980s to create an industry that is large enough to support that. At the same time, everybody else's wages are flat.
Meantime, Uber has raised billions of dollars.
Uber has raised, exactly. Facebook isn't the only company. It's a trend. So I think it's important to recognize that there are many things that are happening in our culture, in our government, in our society that are creating this wealth in addition to any one individual's contribution to it.
Silicon Valley often prides itself on being a meritocracy. Do you think Silicon Valley is a meritocracy?
I think across the board in America, we love the idea of meritocracy, this idea that one person can just work her way up and then be successful. You know, Mark Zuckerberg is the first, he said it in a speech at Harvard last spring, to recognize that the fact that he was able to learn how to code, to teach himself how to code in high school, because his parents had jobs, was an incredible quote unquote lucky break that made it possible for him to be at Harvard and for us to create Facebook collectively. So I think that it's a complex interplay between the role of luck and the role of work, and we need to be more honest that all of these successes are a combination of both.